been fantastic, and today will be no exception. I should also point out, just for another bit of housekeeping, if you happen to be watching this via the recording, there is a comment section on the webpage, and so if you make a comment there, the speakers will be notified and make sure you get your questions answered. So anyway, delighted to have you with us. Thank you for being here. Today, we're going to see two very different but wonderful chatbots. I'm delighted to first introduce Erin Wilson from Arizona State University. Erin's been taking the lead on this really cool initiative. It's been really fun to be a part of. And so, Erin, I will turn the time over to you.
Great, thank you, Vince. I'm really excited to be here today. And yeah, I'm part of ASU's CareerCatalyst, which is part of ASU Learning Enterprise. So it's one of the pillars of our university to create an ecosystem of lifelong learning, and CareerCatalyst is really focused on career-based skills. So we are interested in helping people achieve their career goals. And one of the ways that we're doing that is with our chatbot. So I'm going to share some slides with you all. One second. I don't know why that's not going. Weird. All right, there we go. So yes, so I am with Arizona State University. We are currently implementing a chatbot into one of our flagship product lines, which we call our Professional Skills for Everyone series. And what those courses do is we have leveraged the incredible faculty we have here at ASU to provide people with multi-part and multi-topic recipes for success with common professional challenges that they might face. So we have learning experiences that are about communication or resilience or digital intelligence. And these are all fully asynchronous, non-facilitated courses that are intended to help people develop those skills so that they can achieve their career goals in whatever career they are choosing to be in. They're extremely transferable and really important, but they often get overlooked in career education. So that's kind of the context for our problem. So we're really fortunate here at CareerCatalyst to have a user research team that does a lot of work with potential end users and finds out what they're looking for, what their concerns are, what the gaps are in our designs. And that lets us do really user-centered design. And so the problem that we were finding was that learners don't always know where they should start in a self-paced course or what they could maybe skip over based on their background experience. So it's a really personalized experience for people to take this kind of course. And it can be really hard for people to know what they're supposed to do, especially when there isn't a facilitator that they can go to with questions. So we also found that learners are concerned about the lack of interaction in these kind of self-paced courses. So we wanted to provide a way for learners to get that engagement and hopefully have more retention in the courses and come back because they feel like they got a really good return on their investment. So that's really the business case for us, is to attract learners, keep learners, and get learners to come back to us. So with all of that in mind, we had a couple of goals for our chatbot. We wanted to create a self-sustaining, friendly, and easy to use chatbot. So what I mean by self-sustaining is a chatbot that's kind of a closed loop. So learners can get the information they need and move forward. They don't need to come back and ask more questions. They can get exactly what they need from Sophie when they talk to her the first time. But we also wanted to make sure that it's really friendly, accessible, easy to use for people, because we know that people are coming to these learning experiences with all different background knowledge and experience with technology. So we tried to make, it as easy to use as possible and still provide that sense of social presence in the fully self-paced and asynchronous course. So by having a conversation with Sophie, it feels a little bit more friendly to people, and it makes it feel a little bit more like there is a social presence when you're taking a course kind of on your own. So that led us to Sophie. She is our introductory course guide. You can see a little animation here on the side. I'll also be doing a demo shortly, but Sophie is intended as a pre-course interaction. So before you jump into the content, you talk to Sophie and you kind of find out where you should maybe focus your attention, where are your areas of strength, and you have a one-time experience with her. We have talked about having kind of a more long-term guide for our learners, but with the implementation of this first version of Sophie that's gone public, we've decided to keep it a one-time experience, keep it really contained, just to make it easier to test it and make sure that we're on the right track with Sophie. So as we collect feedback, we'll be finding new and innovative ways to adapt, because this whole process has been super, super iterative. And some of the features that you might notice with Sophie are that we use a lot of buttons and emojis, because we wanted to, again, make it really easy to use and make it so people don't have to type their answers. They don't have to feel like they have to spell things correctly. They can just click the buttons and they can interact with Sophie that way. We also included an avatar image because we want it to feel like Sophie has a persona. Yes, she's a chatbot, but it's a conversation. So we want to make sure that people feel that connection with her. So one of the other things that was really important to us about Sophie is having a conversational tone. And part of what drove us to that decision was looking at some other chatbots on the market that were doing things that we were trying to do, and having the emojis, having more casual language makes it a little more approachable for people, because they know it's a chatbot, but it doesn't have to be really formal. It doesn't have to sound robotic. So we made sure that we worked with our content development team to develop Sophie's voice. She doesn't actually talk, but she does have a voice. And one of the other things that we implemented was the multiple buttons to choose a response, because in an earlier iteration, we had a single button that you just have to choose. But this way, it doesn't feel quite so linear, and it feels more like a conversation because you're choosing how to respond to Sophie. So that was really important to us. And the other important thing was the personalized results, because we could have just listed everything that's in the course and had people decide for themselves where they should start, but we wanted it to feel really personalized. And so based on their responses to questions about how confident they feel about a specific topic, they get an optional starting point. So if they feel really confident, maybe they don't need to spend as much of their time there, but if they really don't know anything about the topic, then they would want to spend a lot more time reading and investing in that. So those are kind of the key features of Sophie. And I'm going to do a quick demo unless there are any questions, Vince, that you've noticed in the chat that I should answer.
Just a lot of thumbs up so far.
Awesome. Love to see that. All right, so I'm going to show you I don't know why this is not opening. There it is. Okay. So this is Sophie in action. So she is embedded in our learning management system with instructions. So when learners come to this page, they see this window, which we made look very much like kind of a texting conversation, but we chose to do a web implementation because it was the easiest for this particular version of Sophie, because this is where our learners are. We can meet them on the web-based platform, but with future chatbots, we may look at other channels, because I know that there are lots of platforms that Mobile Coach works on, and so we might be able to expand into those. But for this version, we decided to focus just on the web-based version. So this is Sophie. She's our pre-course guide, and she's welcoming us to the course. So I'm going to say, hey, Sophie. So before you get started on your learning journey, I'd love to understand a little more about you. I'm excited to help you on your way. Okay. I've got some questions about what you already know. Don't think too hard about them, and don't worry about not knowing something. You're here to learn. So this is, again, trying to encourage the learner and not make them feel like they have to know everything already. So I'm going to say I'm ready, and she's going to start with the questions. So how confident do you feel about the topic of managing your time effectively? So maybe that's something I really, really struggle with. So I have the choice between a really happy face, a neutral face, and a really upset face. So we chose these emojis because it felt like they would be clear about what they mean, and people wouldn't have to think about how to describe how confident they feel. They can just choose one of the emojis and move on. So I'm going to choose the really upset face because maybe that's something I really struggle with. Then how confident do you feel about the topic of addressing immediate stressors? Maybe that's something that I'm okay at doing, but I'm not great at. So I'm going to choose the neutral face. And then how confident do you feel about the topic of reducing long-term or daily stress? So just for the sake of the demonstration, maybe that's something that I am really confident about. And you'll notice that each of these topics are going to be the topics that are covered in the course. So it kind of gives them a preview into what they're going to learn and gives them a sense of, okay, I already know about that, so I don't have to worry about it so much. So I'm going to choose the really happy face. And now Sophie's going to give us some suggestions. So when you choose the really upset face, you're going to learn a lot about that. And I recommend taking your time. So these are all optional starting points. Nobody's required to do what Sophie says, but it gives you kind of encouragement that that's what you're here to learn. So it's okay that you don't know that already. So then we can say, what's next? So you may want to read carefully through the content about addressing immediate stressors, but if you remember more as you go, feel free to move on. So again, it's encouraging you to take ownership of what your background knowledge is and help you understand what is available to you in the course. So then we'll do one more. And since we stated that we already know a lot about reducing long-term or daily stress, we might want to spend more time on some of the other sections. It doesn't mean don't look at those sections because there might be new information, but focus your time on the sections that you're not as confident about. So I'm going to say excellent. And then we introduced this rating question just to get some very raw feedback from learners about how they experienced talking to Sophie. So if we get a lot of 1s and 2s, we're going to know that we need to change something. We need to adjust it. So I'm going to put a 5 because I love talking to Sophie. And she thanks you for the feedback. No matter what you tell her, she thanks you for the feedback. And then she says she's glad to know us better. We can start anytime. And she hopes we enjoy our experience. So I'm going to say, thanks, Sophie. And then she should finish with, see you next time. So you'll again notice those emojis, notice that casual language. And one other thing that we did was add variations. So even if I came back and had this exact same conversation with Sophie, the phrasing would be slightly different. The conversation would be slightly different. It'll be the same ideas, but it won't be phrased exactly the same way. So it won't feel like it's getting really repetitive if you take multiple courses that have Sophie in them. So that's a little bit of a demo. So are there any questions about the demo before I go back to my slides?
Yeah, Erin Roulette asks, if you did not have a satisfactory experience with Sophie, would you have an opportunity as a user to share what aspect wasn't working for you?
So yeah, I think that's something that we would like to do as we gather more data from our learners. So I'm going to talk about this in the lessons learned as well, but we're still very early in the pilot process, so we don't have a ton of data, but I think we would like to follow up with anyone who doesn't enjoy their experience with Sophie and find out why, so that we can then make those adjustments for sure.
And you mentioned earlier that it is a one-time experience. And so Michael asks, does Sophie recognize the learner when they return again, or does it start from scratch and you ask for your name?
It does start from scratch every time. But again, that's just because this is the pilot. So as we continue to iterate, we may be looking into how we can identify that a learner has already been through it. But we didn't want to be getting too far into kind of PII and all of the privacy issues. So we just keep it, when you enter the page, you get a new fresh Sophie to talk to. But we are definitely talking about how we can adjust Sophie to be more lasting. So then if learners want to come back and see what she said to them, then we can have them do that.
Yeah. And this might be stealing some thunder from your lessons learned slide, but my understanding is that you really spent a lot of time creating this overall template, because you've got many courses. And so this is sort of a template to start with. And so the sensibility is just get some experience and then start building functionality from there. Does that sound right?
Yes, absolutely. So we have almost 30 professional experience courses. So we definitely want to make this something that is able to be templatized. But yes, so I think as we get feedback on these first several courses that it's in, we will be able to adjust the template and then expand it into the other ones. So yeah, that definitely sounds right.
And before you leave the demo, how hard or easy was it to customize the web widget? Because I almost didn't recognize this as a mobile coach powered web widget, because it looks so seamless in your website. Was that hard to do? I genuinely
No,
am
it really
curious.
wasn't, because I mean, we have a brand guide and brand colors. So as soon as I was able to talk to your team about how to adjust the settings to make it branded, it really was not terribly hard. And you can preview it so you can make sure that it is what you want before you implement it. So no, I found that to be a really easy experience.
That's great. I think so far we've answered all the questions. So
Cool.
if you want to.
Great. That's awesome. All right, so let's jump back to our slides. So this is the last part is just going to be lessons learned. So these first lessons are things that our team learned through this process. And then I'll share some personal lessons that I learned through this process. So we had about 3 iterations of Sophie since the beginning. We started with a much more text-based iteration, and that did not really resonate with our internal testers, and it didn't reflect what we've seen in the chatbot market. So we moved to buttons, but we were focused on just a single button response for each question. And that felt really linear, and it felt like people could just kind of speed through it and not really read what was being presented to them. So we offer choices now in our buttons for how you respond to Sophie, to make it a little bit more engaging and a little bit more immersive for people, so that they feel like they need to read what is being said before they click a button so they know what they're responding to. So like I said, we're piloting this in 4 of our professional skills courses. It's in all of our Resilience for Everyone courses. So with that pilot, we are collecting data. We don't have a ton of data yet, but as we collect more data, we'll be implementing feedback that we get to make Sophie better in the future. And then because it was such a great experience working with the mobile coach team, we're looking at potentially additional chatbots that could do other jobs for us. So using the knowledge base, using those feedback-based updates that we get for Sophie, to think about how else we could leverage this technology to support our learners. So that's the lessons that our team learned. And then the lessons that I personally learned were kind of about how to use the platform to do what we need to do. It was a really iterative, collaborative process with the mobile coach team, which I really appreciated. And so we identified gaps kind of incrementally. And one of the gaps that we identified sort of in the middle of the process was, if learners respond in a way we don't expect, how do we get them back to the right pathway? And it was so great to be able to work with the team to figure out how to do that and get them back to the right place in the conversation if they go off track. So that was really, really helpful. And I found the iterative process to be really beneficial, because I felt like I was learning a little piece every time I met with the team, but it wasn't overwhelming to do the whole thing. And then using variables was something that we hadn't really considered, because we felt like it was really straightforward. But because I'm not the only one who will be implementing the chatbot in the future, we wanted to make it as easy as possible for people to replace the language that we need to replace in every chatbot with just variables, instead of making it a hunt through all of the script to make sure that you caught them all, sort of a thing. And then finally, the last lesson I learned was, like, it's really worth taking the time to learn the language of mobile coach, which maybe might sound crazy if you haven't built a chatbot before, but there is a very specific language to the script, to the conditions, actions, custom fields, variables, and taking the time to learn that and understand how it works is really valuable, because then I was able to pretty independently copy and implement this chatbot in all of our pilot courses. And when I ran into trouble that was completely self-made because I copied it and I didn't link something properly when I was making a new topic, I was able to hunt down what was wrong and fix it myself because the mobile coach team had spent the time to teach me what to look for. So that was all of my lessons learned. I really had a great experience building Sophie, and I'm looking forward to more opportunities to work on projects like this in the future.
Well, thanks, Erin. And I know internally there was a lot of great buzz about how quick you were to pick up the mobile coach language. And so that's great. So Trisha asks, and you may have touched on this earlier, but Trisha asked, does Sophie come up at any other time in the course or just at the beginning?
So she doesn't, it's just that one-time pre-content experience, but we have considered having chatbots appear in more places. But again, since this is just a pilot of how it works, we didn't do that yet. And there are some limitations with the learning management system for what exactly we can do. I don't know that we'll be able to do like the little pop-up in the corner that you see on websites a lot, but we might be able to have Sophie reappear and kind of check in with people about how they're doing. That might be something we could look at developing for the future.
Yeah, that's often, sometimes, I mean, you've alluded to the work and the iteration and the details of creating the chatbot. Sometimes just navigating, especially if you want a chatbot to interact in a certain system, navigating the restrictions of that system is a little bit of a puzzle. So, well, thank you, Erin. That was awesome. Everyone can give a applause reaction. Thank you so much. That was really great. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Now we will move to our second customer showcase of the session. I would love to introduce Rula Drosis. We've known Rula for many years now, and she is at IC Axon right now, has done some really wonderful work. She collaborated on this presentation with Jennifer Dolan, who unfortunately could not join us this morning. So we'll excuse her, but would like to recognize the wonderful work and contribution she made to this presentation. So Rula, are you ready? Oh, looks like you're on mute.
I am on mute. Thank you, Vince.
Now you're ready. Take it away.
I will share my screen now and see if I can get this going right. All righty. I think we're good. Okay. Yes, I am sharing the correct screen. Perfect. Okay, so thank you, Vince and Corey. That was great. And yes, it's true, Jennifer Dolan was unable to join with us today, but she was a great partner for me in preparing this presentation and in taking this whole journey together with me as we incorporated chatbot for one of our major clients. I did also want to clarify that to respect our clients' confidentiality agreements, I did kind of unbrand our chatbot a little bit. So I renamed her, I changed her look a little bit. And for any of the screenshots that I've included, I did remove anything that was specific to our client. But other than that, the experience is the same that we created for them. And I'm pretty excited to share it with you today. So we'll move on. Here, next slide. Great. That was our intro. Thank you again, Vince. Okay, so we'd already been having conversations with our client about chatbot capabilities. They had been interested in finding a way to introduce a chatbot modality as a tool for training support. They knew that it could reach learners wherever and whenever they are, and that it would be something familiar to them. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find someone nowadays who hasn't used chat in some form or another. So although the pandemic wasn't great for many reasons, it did provide us with an interesting opportunity with this client. So just to clarify, this is pharmaceutical sales force training that I am talking about. So our client was looking to basically shift from in-person selling to virtual selling skills. So they had a training series on that. They also launched a new selling model and did training for that as well. And they knew that they needed a way to reinforce this training so that it could continue as their field force was engaging in customer interactions. They also needed a way to do this that was going to minimize their time. I'm going to say out of field, even though it was virtual. So they wanted to minimize time that they weren't working. And again, it had to be something with impact and that would sustain their learning and keep that learning experience going after the initial training. So they trained on hybrid selling skills, they trained on the new selling model. And after that formal training was done, they needed to find a way to basically continue that experience and reset the forgetting curve. So I'm going to talk super briefly about the forgetting curve because I don't want to assume that everyone's heard about it. So it explains that basically once you learn something, you pretty much begin forgetting it, which is terrible and cynical, but unfortunately true most of the time. So the goal is really to give regular reinforcement. So as time progresses, you would reinforce the learning, prompt reflection on the learning, and so that way it becomes much more instinctual. So like for most of us, if I were to say 5 times 7, you don't even think about it, it'll come out of your mouth. So this is where we started having some fun. Since we had already been exploring chatbot, it was a natural option for us to look at with our client. We knew that it would address their sustainment needs, but also it was something new. It wasn't anything they had been using yet. So our thinking was that it would kind of alleviate a little bit of the learner fatigue with the typical learning initiatives and reinforcement training that they had. So we created Lee, our learning engagement expert. We had fun with the acronyms here. And she was a phone-based chatbot personality, mobile only. And I like that reaction. So she was the virtual coach for our client's training department, and her goal was to provide scenario-based practice and knowledge check questions. And through this regularly spaced repetition that Lee would provide, she did extend that learning experience and help to flatten that forgetting curve we just talked about. So we had a few goals with Lee. We did want to introduce her as a new learning format, the chatbot as a new learning format that resonated with our learners, well, our clients' learners, and introduce her as something they would embrace and engage with. We wanted to establish chatbot as this viable tool for our clients to help them with knowledge reinforcement and skill building. We wanted to provide the training managers with a new option for supporting learning transfer and retention. And then given all the capabilities of chatbot behind the scenes, the data and analytics that we can gather, we wanted to use that to evaluate learner engagement, to evaluate how much they remembered, how much they learned, but also to evaluate the campaign itself. So we did gather data on engagement, participation, scores between the beginning and the end of an individual campaign, and then across various campaigns. So we did several of these with our client, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. I wanted to dive a little deeper into what Lee was for us and our client. So we deployed her across about 200 participants, and we divided them by region and by team. And this was for several reasons. We wanted to gauge how different regions were doing compared to each other. We also wanted to leverage that for competitive reasons. The teams tend to be very, very competitive, so we wanted to leverage that to encourage participation even more. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, she was deployed by mobile only. And we had an interesting challenge with this client. They had phone plans for all of their employees, but the phones themselves belonged to the individual employees. So we needed to find a way to make sure that we were being compliant and that nothing that was company confidential would stay on their phones. So what we did, working closely with Mobile Coach, was start the initial engagement with a text. So Lee would send a text message to each employee on the roster, and then they would click on that, and that would open the web widget that simulated what you see here. It would look like this and look like it was a continuing chat, but it was only in the web widget. And then once they closed the web widget, anything that was company confidential would disappear. So that was kind of our way around those compliance challenges that we ran into. Because this was a new thing for our client, the trainers, the field
Hey,
force.
Rula,
Yes.
I just want to, because I know you just explained that, but that's such
Yes.
an important and interesting dynamic. I just want to sort of reinforce it because
For sure.
we see this more and more happening. So if I understand that correctly, so I'll try to rephrase what I heard.
Sure.
The users, the company was paying for the phone plan for the user, but the user owned the phone.
Correct.
And so what compliance said is that you can't have any company sensitive or company related data actually residing on the phone.
That's
So
right.
if you were to exchange text messages with that user, that would violate that requirement.
Yes. If it was anything that was company confidential in that message. Yes.
So you used a text message to get their attention, but the text message had a link. And then when they clicked on the link, they could go to Lee using a web widget, which is web-based. And so then nothing's saved on the phone. I know that sounds painfully simple after you've done it, but I just wanted to make sure that was correct so that people listening could understand that dynamic.
That's absolutely right. Thank you, Vince, for expanding a little more on that. Yeah, so it was an interesting challenge that we had, and we found a great workaround. The client was happy, the learners were happy, and so were we. So that worked out very well.
Really interesting. Yeah, thank you for clarifying.
My pleasure. Okay, so because this was something very new to our client, we wanted to figure out the best way to encourage everybody to participate. So we started by sending email. We called it a tactical memo, but it was really just an email to introduce Lee, basically to talk about how this is a new initiative and it was going to support them with their learning. And then we launched into the campaign. It was about 15 weeks, this particular first one that we did. And we had a set date and time. Every Tuesday morning, Lee would send out the message. So all participants knew, okay, every Tuesday morning, this is what I'm going to get. I'll have a little message from Lee reaching out to me. And then in order to help encourage people and increase participation, we would also periodically send out another email newsletter type thing, very visual, very infographic, and I'll share an example shortly to let them know how the different regions were performing. So, the East, this particular region, we've had so much participation. This team is participating the most. This team has the best scores. Here are the top 5 participants or top 5 scorers. So just to keep that energy going as they were continuing with their campaign. And then the other thing that we did at the end of the campaign was we prepared an executive summary, literally just a PDF document of the entire dialogue. And actually, I should mention, because this is pharma and everything is very regulated, all of our scripts and dialogues were completely written out, fully written, MedReg approved by the regulatory, medical, and legal departments. And then they were put into the chatbot. So that way everything was approved. And so this entire dialogue, we created a summary, for the leadership, and then also for anyone who maybe entered the campaign late or was hired at a different point in time, anyone who missed anything, because this was an optional solution. Using chatbot, we can't force anybody to do it. So it was introduced, it was encouraged, it was promoted and endorsed by the trainers and the leaders within the company. But ultimately, the end learner did always have the option to opt out. And I will talk a little bit about that as well in our lessons learned. But a little bit more about Lee. We created her similar to what Erin had described earlier. We gave her a personality too. We wanted her to be a little bit sassy, fun, conversational. So she would have some conversational bits every time she would reach out to learners. As an example, we had one pulse that came out just after Thanksgiving. So her question was, oh, I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. What was your favorite food over the weekend? And then she had a pre-scripted reply that also shared what her favorite food was. So we tried to make her as friendly as possible, while at the same time bringing value to all of the learners. We did give her a very particular look and feel with the colors of the company. And then because we had subsequent campaigns for various brands within the business unit, we would change the color of her clothes, change the color of her glasses to match the different brands, and then give extra visual reinforcement. Okay, now you're talking about this brand, now you're learning about this one. So the subsequent campaigns were more specific to different brands compared to the very first one that we did on the selling skills and the selling model. The last thing I wanted to cover here was how she spoke. So she did give very scenario-based questions to really prompt people to think and reflect about what they had learned, how they would apply it. And then she would give adaptive type responses. So similar to Erin's, actually, every time we had a question, the answers were always buttons. We didn't want to give people the risk of typos or having to type long answers or anything like that. So everything was a button. People would click on the answer. If they gave the best answer, we would congratulate them and maybe even give another suggestion on how they could improve next time. If they gave the almost right answer, she would say, okay, you might want to also cover these things in the future. And if they gave the wrong answer, she'd be like, you need to review this. So we tried to give her that kind of adaptive type response to be more personalized to how learners were interacting with her. So here's an example I've shown a little bit on the left. This is how the chat part looked. And on the right is an example of one of the emails that we would send out. So we made it very, very visual. People could see graphs and stars and this kind of energy within that communication, just to keep people excited. Alrighty. Our lessons learned. Okay. So this was quite interesting. And again, because we did this over a period of time and we continued with multiple campaigns, we had various learnings that we accumulated and multiple conversations, both with Corey and Vince about, oh, I don't know, what's happening here? Is this good? How do we improve this? So one of the things from the very, very beginning that Mobile Coach had shared with us was really make sure you set expectations. And so we did our best to do that, manage expectations on who is Lee, what does she do, what can she do, what does she not do? And then the other thing that we learned partway through was share how long each engagement is going to be. If people know, okay, this will take me 2 minutes, that's great, I can fit this in. So that was something that we thought, oh, okay, let's do that. We hadn't thought about it before. Having key leadership be internal champions to endorse the chatbot. Initially, we had participation, but we're like, we weren't feeling so excited about the initial levels of participation. And so as we moved forward, we did engage a bit more with some of the internal trainers and leaders to encourage their teams even more to participate. And we definitely saw a difference. The language around opt out versus not now. So the initial communication from Lee would say, oh, are you ready? Are you ready to start our engagement? Yes or no? And if the answer was no, then the option was, do you want to opt out or shall I reach out to you a little bit later? And there was some confusion around what opt out meant because some people thought that meant just reach out to me later. And then we realized that we should always encourage them, A, to understand what opt out means. It means we will not reach out to you anymore, again, ever, unless you opt back in. So when we would send the reinforcement messages around participation, hey, your colleagues are participating, join in the chat, we would remind people, if you opted out, but you actually want to continue, opt back in by doing this. So that was a surprising learning, which was very important for us. The other thing that we did learn was that because of this compliance challenge that we had, that both Vince and I talked about just a little bit earlier, where we start with the SMS and then go to the web widget, there is an extra click there. You have to say yes, and then you go to the web widget, and then you start your interaction. So we were thinking in future, we might switch to a different modality, something like Teams where you can jump right in right away. The fewer the clicks, the better in general. So it's something that we've been thinking about. And then lastly, we did do a survey, at least after a few of our campaigns, just to get more information from the learners. What did they like? What did they not like? Was the engagement long enough? Was it too short? So this is just an example of one of the surveys that we sent, a bit of a 1 to 5 scale or some typed responses. So all of that was very helpful for us in how we could improve our chatbot for the future. And I'm excited to say that it is part of our clients' reinforcement campaign in general now. So we're very proud and happy about that.
That's fantastic.
Thank you. That was my presentation.
Yay. Thank you, Rula. That was great. Yeah, really fantastic use case. And two points, many points, but two that I'd like to highlight. I find it interesting that as soon as you got internal leaders more involved in getting people to engage with Lee, that made a big difference. That's so true, at least at the beginning of many chatbot projects. I think I mentioned this during the keynote, that you can have the most engaging user experience, but there is a little bit of friction to get people on it for the first time. And doing some work to get internal awareness up, get people motivated to share it. That's a really great best practice that Rula pointed out. And then I didn't realize this, but I loved the design decision of opt out versus not now. That's really great. Yeah.
It was really interesting that we learned that as we were going through it. Yeah, we weren't expecting it.
Yeah, that's something I think that lots of chatbot designers out there can pause and think if that's an appropriate way to. Of course, if people want to opt out, you do want to make that clear, especially if it's over SMS. But I think a lot of users, given the choice, would say, "Oh yeah, not now is more appropriate." So that's great. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions come in through the chat. So thank you, Rula. Thank you for everybody who participated. Thanks to Erin again earlier. What a great session. I'd just like to plug that in about 15 minutes, we're having our last session of the conference. It's our closing keynote. We'll be demoing a chatbot that a number of us attendees worked on in just a short 3 days for a local food bank, Tabitha's Way. I'm really excited to show that off. And so please join if you can. I'll be sharing some last minute takeaways of the conference and also doing a little Ask Me Anything session. So please join at noon. If you're interested in this session, the recording of this session, it should be up later this afternoon. And all the sessions for Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday are already up on the conference website. They'll be up until the end of the month, at least on the conference website, and then we'll announce where they might be available after that. But please share these sessions with your colleagues. They've just been so valuable. So thanks, everyone. And we hope to see you in a few minutes at the closing keynote. Bye-bye.